All right, welcome to Talkin' Investing. I am Tom, and as always, this is not financial advice. Today, I want to talk about a Bitcoin ETF. So the SEC has some decisions that they're going to make fairly soon over the next couple of weeks, and I want to go through those and talk about those. And in specific, I want to talk about Grayscale because it's a very unique situation, and there's some potential opportunity here. So we talk about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners and cryptocurrency all the time on this channel. So if that's content that you're interested in, or if you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also, if everybody would do us a big favor and smash the like button, I really would appreciate it. It helps the channel out a lot, and it helps get these videos out to more people. Okay, so I want to go through the status of a potential Bitcoin ETF, and this has been in the works for quite some time. The SEC has rejected many applications. Every single one that's been submitted so far has either been deferred or rejected. However, there is reason to believe that that is going to change at some point, potentially in the near future. And most specifically, I want to talk about Grayscale's application because they have a unique situation different from anybody else who has submitted an application. So I want to go through all that and see where things are and talk about some of the potential opportunities and talk about what is an ETF, why does it even make it, and how is it going to affect the price of Bitcoin, if at all. Okay, so I'm just going to start out in Investopedia. An ETF is a marketable security, meaning it has a share price that allows it to be easily bought and sold on exchanges throughout the day, and it can be sold short in the United States. Most ETFs are set up as open-ended funds and are subject to the Investment Company Act, except where subsequent rules have modified their regulatory requirements. Open-ended funds do not limit the number of investors involved in the product. So essentially, an ETF is a marketable security. It's just like a stock. You can trade it, you can buy it, you can short it. What a Bitcoin ETF would do, in my opinion, is it would open up a lot of doors to people that have currently stayed out of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, whether it's because they're not familiar with the products or the process is too difficult. And I know for those of you who are tech savvy, it does not seem like a big deal to go buy some Bitcoin, but it is multiple steps more difficult than just buying an ETF. So in other words, if you have a brokerage account and you're already investing, you can just use that to buy a Bitcoin ETF versus having to go out and set up another account. And the other thing is, right now, we seem to be in a period of time where a lot of these crypto exchanges are in crisis. So that makes it even less likely that people who were reluctant to begin with to go into Bitcoin are going to then put their money into one of these crypto exchanges. The alternative to that would be to put it into cold storage, which is even more complicated. So this really is a very big barrier for a lot of money that is sitting on the sidelines. So I think, it's my personal opinion, and again, this is not financial advice. I think that long term, an ETF will have a major impact. And once one Bitcoin spot ETF is approved, ultimately there will be several that are approved. So it's just another way to gain access to Bitcoin. It's a much easier way. It's a much more traditional way for those investors who have more experience and maybe more set in their ways on how to invest. This would be a very good vehicle for them to get involved in Bitcoin. If you're cryptocurrency literate and you are trading cryptocurrency, this is probably not the vehicle for you, right? Because it does have drawbacks. You don't own the actual cryptocurrency. You own shares in a security that's backed by the cryptocurrency. So you get the price action on Bitcoin. You just don't own the Bitcoin. So obviously there'll be a group of people not interested in that. However, there's another group of people sitting on the sidelines that do want in, but they're afraid of the current ways to buy Bitcoin. Long term, I think this will bring a massive additional amount of money into Bitcoin. So there's no telling what the knee-jerk reaction would be. I think it's one of the top few things that will ultimately allow Bitcoin to get back on a bull run and get to some of these prices that we think it's going to reach in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, so there's two Bitcoin ETFs that are coming up for review in front of the SEC over the next basically week and a half. There's a Bitcoin ETF proposed by Bitwise, and the approval deadline for that is Wednesday, June 29th. So that is tomorrow. So again, many of these have gone before the SEC. All have been either rejected or deferred. I think the two I'm going to talk about today have no more room to be deferred. I think they're either going to be accepted or rejected. So the first one will be tomorrow, and that is Bitwise. Now, I think the vast majority of people highly doubt that this is going to get approved tomorrow. Most people believe that although a Bitcoin ETF is inevitable, we're not there yet. The SEC has had some major pushback on this. The first thing we'll see is whether or not the Bitwise Bitcoin ETF goes through tomorrow and is approved. So obviously, if that happens, then we're basically at the finish line, and I think we can expect a series of ETFs to come over time, and Bitcoin will start to reap the benefits of that, in my opinion. But the one that's a lot more interesting and that's a lot more high profile, and that I think stands a much better chance of getting approved, is is the Grayscale application for a Bitcoin ETF. The deadline for the SEC on that one is July 6th, so that's still only just about a week away. So that is imminent, and this is a very high-profile situation, and Grayscale is extremely committed to getting this ETF approved. It's to the point where, from my perspective, they're not going to take no for an answer, and I'll tell you what I mean by that as the video goes on. There's also a massive opportunity that the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF provides that is unique to Grayscale that no other ETF can do. So there's something called the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, so we'll talk about that a little bit, but the ETF that Grayscale wants to do is to convert their trust into an ETF. So the reason that is significant is the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust is already one of the largest holders of Bitcoin in the world. They have about 650,000 Bitcoin. It's like 3.5% of the world's supply of Bitcoin, and a trust is set up very differently from an ETF, so there's a lot more barriers to getting involved in that, and it trades at a big discount to the price of Bitcoin, so you don't get the full price action right now. So I don't want to go too much into the weeds on the difference between the trust and an ETF. Suffice it to say that the trust does not provide the same liquidity and the same one-to-one type ratio as an ETF would. But the point would be that with Grayscale, they already have 650,000 Bitcoin. So this would be an ETF that would not start at zero. They would start with, one of the world's biggest supplies of Bitcoin already. This is an article from yesterday, and to be fair, this is on CoinDesk, and CoinDesk is actually owned by the same company that owns the Grayscale Trust. Okay, so this was yesterday. Grayscale remains unequivocally committed to converting GBTC to an ETF, and that's the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust to an ETF. So they're looking to take this 650,000-ish Bitcoin and move it from the trust and turn it into an ETF. With the Securities and Exchange Commission's final deadline to decide on whether to approve the Grayscale application to convert its Bitcoin Grayscale Trust to an exchange-traded fund looming on June 6th, CEO Michael Sonnenschein wrote in a letter to investors Monday that his company is unequivocally committed to getting the trust converted. Sonnenschein reiterated steps the firm has taken to garner support for a conversation including working to educate the general public about the issue, meeting with the SEC, and hiring a former lawyer from the Obama administration to assist with the process. Sonnenschein wrote that despite being encouraged by the SEC's actions over the last 8 months in approving other futures-based Bitcoin ETF products, the firm is still preparing for all possible post-ruling scenarios. So what he's referring to is the SEC did approve a Bitcoin futures ETF. What they have not approved is a spot ETF. So a spot ETF is actually Bitcoin itself. The futures ETF is just trading Bitcoin futures, which is a derivative product. Now, also, on a side note, this was just last week, ProShares launched an ETF aimed at shorting Bitcoin. So not only is there an ETF that's long Bitcoin through Bitcoin futures, there is now an ETF that is short Bitcoin through Bitcoin futures. Things like this continue to bolster the case that it's time for a Bitcoin spot ETF. It's very hard to justify, in my mind, how you could have an ETF on the futures, which are derivative of the product, and not allow an ETF on the product itself. Okay, this is an article that also came out last week. Pro-Bitcoin Commissioner Hessler Pierce slams SEC for almost legendary resistance to spot Bitcoin ETF. So this is a commissioner, a highly ranking official from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, is criticizing the regulatory body for its fierce reluctance to approve a spot-based Bitcoin exchange-traded fund. In a new speech, Commissioner Hessler Pierce says that the SEC's consistency in rejecting spot Bitcoin ETF bids is becoming almost legendary, quote, at this point. And the regulator is holding Bitcoin-related products to a higher standard than other assets. So this is a quote: "It is time for the commissioner to stop denying categorically spot crypto exchange-traded products. The commissioner's resistance to a spot Bitcoin ETP is becoming almost legendary. The reasons for the resistance to a spot product are difficult to understand apart from a recognition that the commission has determined to subject anything related to Bitcoin and presumably other digital assets to a more exacting standard than it applies to other products." So you can see this is just one example. There is some growing pressure inside of the SEC. My personal opinion is it is inevitable that a Bitcoin ETF is on the horizon. Now, that does not mean that it's going to get approved either tomorrow through Bitwise or next week through Grayscale. However, if Grayscale does get rejected, you can see this article. Grayscale's ready to go to war over its Bitcoin ETF. So Grayscale is not going to drop this. If this conversion of their trust to an ETF is rejected next week, that is not going to be the end of the story. Grayscale is prepared to go to court if the SEC gives it a thumbs down. It's bound to be a tough battle, and this week Grayscale brought in some more firepower. Grayscale on Tuesday hired veteran attorney Donald Verrilli, who served as Solicitor General during the Obama administration, as a legal strategist. So you can see Grayscale is extremely serious about getting their trust converted to an ETF. So we don't know that that's going to happen next week. In fact, I think most people believe it will not happen next week, just given the track record that the SEC has of rejecting Bitcoin spot ETF proposals. And they do have a little cover in the fact that a lot of these crypto exchanges right now are going through some liquidity crisis. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the crypto world at the moment. So I do think it would still be very realistic to expect that these will get rejected. However, I personally think there's a much bigger chance of this happening next week with Grayscale than was previously thought. So, it's by no means a given, and I would certainly not be surprised to see them get rejected, but I do think the possibility exists that this does happen next week. So that would be a game changer. The last thing I want to show you is what is unique about the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust and why it presents additional opportunity versus just a regular Bitcoin ETF. Okay, so right now the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust has holdings per share of $19.22 in Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin that they hold is worth $19.22 per share. However, the market price of their shares is $13.51. So you can see there's a big discount there, and that discount is based on a lot of reasons. At one point, actually, this was a premium, so it was trading at higher than Bitcoin. Now it's trading at a discount. So theoretically, if this were to be turned into an ETF, everybody who currently owns shares in Grayscale, you would think theoretically these shares would go from $13.51 straight to $19.22. Now, there still may be a little arbitrage in the middle, based on the fact that it's not a direct hold of Bitcoin and whatever fees that the ETF may charge. However, this gigantic gap should be closed to an extremely small gap if they can convert this to an ETF. So not only would this provide the entire public the opportunity to enter an ETF, but it would provide existing holders of the Grayscale Trust an immediate premium. So this spread has gotten bigger and bigger over time, and recently, over the last week, it actually narrowed a little bit based on the fact that there's the potential for this ETF to get approved next week. So again, there is this one-time unusual opportunity here if you own shares of the Bitcoin Grayscale ETF, which is stock ticker GBTC. You can see Grayscale is extremely committed to making this happen. I don't know if they're going to get this done next week or not. So I guess we're about a week away from finding out, and we'll find out tomorrow if the ETF from Bitwise gets approved or declined. So again, I believe that is likely to get declined, and I think the odds are still that this Grayscale one is going to be declined. However, I do think the odds have increased dramatically over the last few weeks with this very serious push that Grayscale is having, and basically the fact that they, quote, are willing to go to war over this if need be. If need be, they will take this to the courts and fight until this is converted. So while I think that that is inevitable, obviously this is not financial advice. I don't know what the SEC is going to do. So for the moment, the potential for a Bitcoin ETF remains unknown. Over the next week, we're going to find out some big answers, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens from there. I will definitely do an update video once we see what happens, particularly to the Grayscale ETF, but it would be just as big news if the Bitwise ETF was approved. So that's all I've got for you right now on a potential Bitcoin ETF. So if you made it this far, please remember to subscribe to the channel and smash the like button. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.